And welcome to Chapter 8 of the Chassidic Approach to Joy. We're going to be discussing growing from pain. And last week, one of the things we talked about, of course, was that you can choose to discipline yourself, thought, speech, and action. You can discipline yourself to divert your attention so that you're not feeling the pain. The idea, of course, was that you have a choice how you react to the situations. You have a choice how you want to respond and how you react to them. The positive side of that is you can choose how you want to respond. Sometimes people in traumatic situations will make an unconscious choice. There's a concept called a disassociation disorder, where people disassociate from the stress or the pain or the suffering unconsciously, and that can become a problem in and of its own.
Especially later.
Especially later, exactly. So there's a merit at times to to be conscious of the pain, conscious of the suffering, conscious of how painful and stressful things are, and in a sense embrace that in the moment, and be able to then make a decision of, and I think we talked about this last week. A friend of mine who's a chaplain had a very stressful situation when he was dealing with a large airline crash, and there were not a lot of survivors, and so the bodies had to be dealt with, and that obviously that's a lot of traumatic stuff. But he spent a week doing that. So in his mind, he made a conscientious decision. This is really hard. This is painful. This is really ugly. I'm not going to deal with these emotions right now. I'm going to put them aside, and I will deal with them later when I have more time. Right now, I have to do what I have to do. And so there was a conscientious decision of, I hear it, I feel it, I see the pain. I'm not going to be overwhelmed with it. I'm going to, put it away for now, put it in storage, and we'll bring it out later, and we'll deal with it then. It's a conscientious decision. And so in that sense, disassociation can be very powerful. At an unconscious level, if it's not dealt with, the body holds a score. There's even a book about this. The body holds a score, which means that emotional traumas in our psyche, they're not going anywhere. They're going to be there. Either we bring them up and we deal with them constructively and healthy, or they will fester and they will find another way to be expressed, typically in very negative ways. And so we need to be aware of that, and we need to make some conscientious decisions about that as well. So in one sense, we need to know we have a choice how we respond, but that does not mean negating that anything ever happened. We have to understand and in some way embrace the pain of it all, which is why we have, and we talked about this before, but the idea of sitting Shiva, and there's the immediate agony of the loss. There's the agony, when the person hasn't been buried yet. Then there's the 7 days after the funeral, and then there's that 30-day period, which is inclusive of the 7 days, which is a period of mourning. There's an 11-month period of mourning. So we are dealing with the pain, but in a constructive and positive focused format, acknowledging it. One of the things that I spend a lot of time doing often is with families that have a deceased one. Part of our conversation is, what are you going to do constructively in the merit of the deceased? Whether that's taking on a new mitzvah, giving extra tzedakah, going to shul regularly and saying Kaddish, but making a conscientious choice not to disassociate, but to take it and do something positive with it. To bring out that through a healthy way of doing it, right? I remember There was a kid years ago in Chicago. We had a Grossman's childcare. It was a licensed group home where we had kids come and stay with us and play with our kids who were homeschooling. And that's how we got to stay home. We stayed home and had someone else pay for it. But that was by opening up the home to a licensed childcare, and other kids came and they played, and we had the day, and we did all the learning that you do in a daycare that we were doing anyway with our kids, and then they would go home. We had it. So we had one family who called, and they had a child who had a medical condition where he was pretty much nonverbal. He needed a feeding tube, and he couldn't feel pain. So most kids, when they fall down, they go boo-boo, they scream and cry, and they draw attention to it, and you go check and you find out, how serious is the pain? What are we dealing with here? Is this just a boo-boo, or is this a potential concussion, or is there bleeding? What are we looking at? This kid did not feel pain. And because he did not feel pain, if he fell over and no one saw it, we don't know about it. So there was this constant awareness on our part that the value of pain is an early warning sign. Pain gives us an opportunity to say, hey, something's wrong. Let's deal with this. Let's see how serious this is, and let's see what we need to do to manage it. But pain is a very important early warning sign. And so this is important. In fact, there's an old Jewish verse saying about the knowledge of the disease is half the cure. If you don't know that there's a problem, you can't fix it. If you know that there's a problem, now you can design how we're going to deal with it, how we're going to fix it. David, you have your hand up.
Yeah, isn't there at least a third way that people deal with stress and bad things, that they completely some people completely go inside themselves and they have no recollection of it? It's just not part of it. They bury it so deep that
right. That's part of a disassociation.
Yeah. But those people, it's not that it comes up and festers again. It's just that it's lost to them.
It comes back, David.
Yeah.
I've seen people where it doesn't come back. In fact, you ask them about a trauma and something that happened.
So I'm going to tell you that science has shown that somewhere it's manifesting in some other disorder. There's something else that's going on, that it's coming up. There's a book called and the Body Keeps the Score. You can read that as a reference, but it's a very good book, and it talks about this exact idea, is that you can think nothing happened, you can disassociate with it completely. The body is holding it, and it will find its expression. And oftentimes in I'm going to use the word psychosomatic, not that I truly understand what that term means, but it will come up in another way. So it's never gone. The body keeps the score.
It comes up in another way, and that the person doesn't deal with it. And since they can't deal with it, there's other stuff they can't deal with. So they're directly affected overall.
Yes, absolutely. It will take its toll. Absolutely. Yeah. So in the story, there was a story in our text about a Fabringen, and the Fabringen was being held in a dark basement in Soviet Russia. And someone was like, "Where's the Fabringen?" "Down here in the basement." There's no light, because then it could have drawn attraction. The neighbors could see, they could report it. So it was all being held very clandestine. And so the person had to climb down. He couldn't see in the dark. He had to come in, and they told him, "Don't worry, your eyes will adjust. You'll get used to it," right? The rabbi then started speaking about this idea that this itself is a problem. Yes, your eyes will dilate and you'll be able to see in the darkness, but you could get so acclimated to the darkness that you forget you're in darkness. And that's a problem. That's a problem. Sometimes, and I'm going to use the example you just talked about. There are people who who have decided not to deal with some stressful situation, and they let it fester, and it comes up in other ways, and they're in complete denial of what the real problem is. In the meantime, they've got all these other maladies that are coming up, and the root is not a physical health issue. It's a mental health issue that's manifesting in other ways. So sitting in darkness, getting used to that in itself is totally not helpful. Totally not helpful, and important to know the difference between the two. So in some of the other classes we've learned a little bit of Tanya. Tanya is the magnum opus of the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe talks about a lot about getting to know yourself and who you are and what you're truly capable of, and he talks about that. In a sense, you have to say it was really the very first of the self-help books in that sense, but it's getting to know oneself. And one of the things that the Alter Rebbe talks about is getting to understand the difference between atzvus and merirus. This is a big
Difference between what and what?
atzvus and merirus. Atzvus is typically translated as sadness or depression, a heaviness. Merirus is a bitterness, and we'll look into both of these a little bit, but the important part to know is the most important part to know is how do you tell the difference, right? Because the symptoms can be very similar. So how do you tell the difference? Atzvus is all about it perpetuates itself. It's all about feeling down, feeling bad. It's a lethargy. It sucks your energy out. It's not about finding a solution. It's all about withdrawing and self-pity, and it's very unproductive. Bottom line, it's very unproductive.
Is that depression?
So be careful about the word depression, because there's a chemical depression, a depression a clinical depression, which is not just from life and what goes on. There's a chemical imbalance or something like that. So clinical depression is a separate thing. We're talking about something goes down and a person decides that they're going to focus on it. They're going to become simply absorbed in it. And woe is me. Oh, it's so difficult. Oh, my life. Just think of a Jackie Mason routine. So that's the atzvus. It's not productive. Merirus, translated as bitterness, is a force to be dealt with, because merirus is this needs to be changed, and I'm not going to stand for this. Bitterness means, when life gets you down, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. You're not going to sit still for this. You find a way to deal with the challenges. You find a way to try to deal with the problems, and you fix them.
How does that equate to bitterness?
When you've got a thorn in your side, you are going to take it out.
But I'm not bitter about it. I hurt.
So pain, physical pain, is the physical part, right? But what's the emotional piece of that?
Pain.
And when we talk about that, we use the word merirus, a bitterness, is that using a Marine Corps terminology, this sucks.
Yeah,
That's a word of art.
it's not just the Marines, it also sucks in the Army.
There you go. But the result of that is if it moves you forward to do something about it, that's bitterness. Merirus is when it bothers you enough to do something about it. If you're just complaining, then that goes back to the atzvus side. You're just
No.
belly aching and complaining. Nothing's
In
going to
other
come
wor-
from that.
In other words, rabbis, the Marines say, embrace the suck.
There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the idea, is that when something is troubling you or is uncomfortable or is not going right, you can either be bitter about it and complain and whine and bellyache and be bitter and be mournful about it, or you can be bitter enough to get up and do something about it. And that's the difference between these two. The atzvus, you sit and do nothing and complain. The merirus is it drives you. It's a powerful factor for driving change. That's merirus, and that's what we want to do. When challenges come up, we can choose how we want to deal with things. We're not talking about ignore them, although there may be a time to put it aside for a while, right? But we're not advocating that we should completely negate it, but rather we should have that merirus, the bitterness. But here's an important part about bitterness. Everything has its time and place. So when it's Passover time, you eat matzahs. It's a great mitzvah. It's a wonderful mitzvah. It reminds us of the Yetzias Mitzrayim, the going out of Egypt, and all that entails. But if a person eats matzah on Yom Kippur, dude, you missed the boat. You totally missed the point, right? Yom Kippur has its thing. Passover has its thing. Know what to do in its time. Bitterness can be very good. It can move you forward in its time. But if someone spends their whole day being bitter, that's not productive either. And the example he gives in the book is antibiotics, right? An antibiotic kills bacteria in the body. Well, it also kills the positive bacteria, the digestive system's bacteria. So yes, it kills, but it kills a lot more than just the negative pieces as well, right? And we think about chemotherapy. Yeah, it kills the bad cells, but it kills a lot of other stuff too. And so you have to have that balance of how much chemotherapy is going to be productive in the long run by killing off bad cells, but not so much that it kills off the person. That's not productive. So it has to be a balance. So merirus, bitterness, this, I'm going to say, self-flagellation, right? When we talk about all the things we've done wrong and all the things that are not going right, and there's a certain amount of yes, we should consider those things so we can fix them. Just like a person who's running a business, he has to take inventory. And sometimes when he's taking inventory, he's looking at losses. How much was rotted or was stolen or decayed, or what are the losses, right? But you need to know what the losses are so you can do better in the future. So there has to be an accounting of that. But you don't spend your day accounting. You don't spend your whole day thinking about all the things that have gone wrong. That's not productive. So one has to set aside a time, like a little bit of antibiotics, a little bit of chemotherapy, a little bit of self-flagellation of the stupid things that we're doing and where we really need to improve. There's a time for that. There's a time and a place for that. Too much of that is unproductive. So we need to know the difference between atzvus and merirus, just being bitter, just being depressed or being bitter, knowing the difference between those two. But even within the bitter, how much time do I spend in that? We have a custom at the end of Shiva. At the end of Shiva, when someone has finished their 7 days of sitting Shiva, their morning period, after the morning services at the house, the person who's sitting Shiva goes to sit down, and the people go and they say, may you be comforted amongst all the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. Now get up. Your Shiva is over. Get up. So the people that care enough to come and be a part of that person's life also are telling them, you sat Shiva for 7 days, now get up. And the custom is that they get up and they go outside. The first time they're going outside in 7 days, because they've been inside the house for 7 days sitting Shiva. They get out of the house, walk around the block, and move on. So there's a time to mourn, and there's a time to move on. King Solomon in the book of Koheles, Ecclesiastics, talks about a time for everything, right? A time for a mourning, a time for for celebrating it.
To reap and a time to sow.
And what's that song? Turn, turn, turn. But yes, so there's a time for everything, and we need to know there is a time to be bitter about our own losses or our own mistakes or our own stupidities, but it has to be limited. It has to be in small amounts at the right time so that we can move on, not to spend our days bemoaning. So when are those times? So one of the times on a daily basis is during morning and afternoon services. There's a time for al chet shechatanu lefanecha. We talk about that we've sinned before God. Here's the areas we've made our mistakes in. There's a time for that, and then we go on, and we say Ashrei, thank God that we're alive and we have things to be grateful for, and we go on. We do that in the morning prayers. We do that in the afternoon prayers briefly, and then during Kriya Shema before going to bed at night. Again, there's a time for reflection on the day, but it's a limited time. It's a reflection of the day, not the month, not the year. It's a reflection of the day. And a time to say, hey, where did I blow it today? Where could I have done better? There's a time, there's a time preceding Rosh Chodesh, the monthly celebration of the new moon. There's a time then to consider. But the biggest time of the year is the time we are currently in. The month of Elul. The entire month of Elul is the time before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And in this time, it's a time to take an accounting of the year. How was my year? And we're preparing to have that accounting on Rosh Hashanah in Shul. So we're collecting data, so to speak, like an accountant who's about to do his accounting for the year. We're collecting our thoughts during this month. Rosh Hashanah comes, we do our full accounting. Yom Kippur, we do our full repentance. And then we go on to Sukkot and celebrate. And the time for the morning and the time for the accounting is over. Now it's time to celebrate. And now it's time to celebrate all the greatness we have been blessed by God. The harvest season and the whole year and all those things we have. And by Simchas Torah, now we're making the hachlatas, the decisions of what we're going to do different next year. It's a great, perfect time to be taking on new hachlatas, new commitments to how I'm going to live this coming year. So going back to kind of a synopsis of the whole chapter here, we had previously talked about you have the choice between stimulus and response. You have the choice how you're going to react. You can choose to disassociate from the problems and move forward. But be aware that the problems still have to be dealt with in one way or another. The emotional treatment of trauma has to be considered and dealt with. The losses have to be considered. But we have to know the difference between atzvus and merirus, just getting depressed about things and letting it drag on and on and on and never getting past it, versus merirus, a bitterness that drives action. Now, on a massive scale, on a big scale, there was this conversation that there was someone who wanted to donate $100,000 towards a Holocaust memorial, a monument. And the question, and he went to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And the Rebbe's response was, forget the memorial, help a yeshiva. In other words, yes, there's a time to mourn for the past, but if you're putting that kind of money into it, build the future. You know, I'm looking at in my time, a tremendous amount of time and energy has gone into the Holocaust remembrance in the sense of never again, never again. And I get that. But where would we be today if the energy spent on that had been spent on building up Jewish tradition, building up yeshivas, building up, you know, there's a time to be and there's a point to being order to be you know, witness to the pain, but there also needs to be a consideration of how do we move forward from here, and we need to limit how much is just the remorse and how much is the commitment to the future.
If the attitude is never again, isn't it kind of intertwined with how do you make it never again?
Yes, absolutely. But
Now, if you are fixated on never again and making it never again, you certainly may not have time to do other things, but you are still doing something moving forward.
right. And so again, it comes down to proportion. How much proportion is spent on remembering the past and how much is creating the future? And the Chassidic approach is to focus more of the joy, to focus more on the opportunities the future has available to us. What can we do forward? And it's summed up in Maisa Hu Ha'ikar. Action is the main thing. How do we go forward? Action is the main thing. So absolutely, I'm not saying that there was not value in the whole never again, and there's not a value in Holocaust memorial museums. Those are important. But I'll give an experience, and I think I spoke about this last week, but I'll give a personal experience from this summer, right? I was in Montgomery, Alabama this summer, and there's a Museum of Justice. And it was all about the Black slavery in America. And it's important to know how bad, awful that was and how not to make the same mistakes. But when I spent time at Modob Airfield in Tuskegee, and I saw what the Tuskegee Airmen did and accomplished, that was inspiring. That was tremendously inspiring. So both teach about the negative past and the things we did very bad and poorly in America, but which one inspires the future with energy? The people walked away from the Justice Museum feeling negative and remorseful, but I didn't see anyone walking away with an energy to change. It just felt down. On the other hand, Modo Field was really inspiring, and you felt, you know, a handful of people can make a world of difference when focused on positive change. They really can, and here's proof of it.
So can't you say that I don't 100% agree, because some people take that negative, as you said, and it goes back to what you say about the Yetzer Hara. You want to make it do God's work. So some people take that negative and everything and say we're not going to make this. We're going to do other stuff. It's going to motivate to do other things.
Yeah.
That's yes. So that's what we want, and that's the difference between atzvus and merirus. Atzvus is that place of where we're just going to wallow in the negative and in the pity and feeling down, and merirus is the bitterness that drives change, and that's what we want to focus on.
So it's taking the Yetzer Hara and making it do God's work to make it do good.
Exactly. Action is the main thing, moving things forward. There has to be a time of accounting and remorse and bitterness, but the I want to say, use the British term, the proof is in the pudding. Did that make you move forward and do something about it? And that's the joy. That's when we're talking class all about the Chassidic approach to joy. The Chassidic approach to joy is when negative stuff happens, is that empowering you and driving you to now go do something about it. That's what we want to look for. We want to know the difference between atzvus and merirus, the depression which sucks out energy and is directed all about self and withdrawal, versus the bitterness which demands change and gives you the energy to go about and do something different. And that's the big difference. And I think this is a key lesson in the Chassidic approach to joy, is that we don't want to completely negate or disavow or disown negative stuff. We want to embrace the suck, as the Marines say, right? Embrace the suck and use it to drive us forward to accomplishing acts of goodness and kindness and positive change in the world. So not to ignore it, but to actually use that as a springboard for greater things. And I think that's the summary of the whole lesson for this chapter of growing from pain. You know, we don't want to completely disassociate from it. We want to contain it. And we contain our thoughts, speech, and our actions. And we talked about, last chapter, we talked about, you know, knowing that the mind controls the thoughts, and we can choose to focus on positive things and not belabor the negative stuff. That's a choice we make, but we're not negating the negative. The question is, are we using this to empower us to make change? And that's the biggest criteria in that Chassidic approach to joy, is that when the negative, painful, stressful stuff comes, acknowledge it, package it, and now use it for energy to make good change in the world. Ma'aseh hu ha'ikar, action is the main thing. Positive change. Go out and do acts of goodness and kindness. I will use the example. This class started off with an acknowledgement of some people who are not in the best of health right now. So what do? Torah, tefillah, tzedakah, right? We are learning Torah in their merit. We gave tzedakah in their merit, and we said a blessing that a speedy recovery for them. So the acknowledgement of suffering demands we do something. And the doing is best directed by Torah, tefillah, tzedakah, the three pillars of the foundation of Judaism.
When you deal with this concept, are you talking about one's own pain and then motivation to overcome it and do positive? Or are we talking about somebody else's pain?
Yes.
I knew that.
You set yourself up.
Uh-huh.
So
No,
here's the thing.
I
Yeah.
think that it's important. It's important to what is that saying? Lord, give me the wisdom the strength to change what I can and to accept
Yes.
what I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Exactly. So part of it is knowing ourselves and the awareness of when I do something stupid or whatever, awareness of that, and then decision to make a change. That's personal, right? When we're dealing with someone else, the first thing we need to do is to be able to relate to their suffering and acknowledge their suffering. When we go to a Shiva house, we're not allowed to speak until spoken to. And then we stay on the subject that the mourner is talking about. We don't try and divert the attention to anything else. But somewhere in that conversation, with sensitivity and compassion, we want to be able to say, hey, what can we do to bring light into this darkness, to fill the void that's been left with positive things? How do we
Is that a
fill that?
question you ask yourself, or is that a question you ask the mourner?
That is a question as a chaplain that I will certainly address the mourner. Now, sometimes I'm visiting not as a chaplain. It's not my place. You know, we have a tradition that only closest family and friends visit during the first 3 days of Shiva, then the rest of the people can come. But the first few days, it really should be those who are closest, not the general public. So those who are closest and those who have that attachment, they can help a mourner move forward. Everyone else needs to be able to just share the sympathy and ask, if there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. Can I bring a meal? You know, can I do some shopping for you? Can I, you know, whatever I can do to help, offer to help. But those who are closest, or those who are in a position like a rabbi or a chaplain, to be able to say, we're going to be looking at moving forward. How can we do that will best respect and glorify the person who's passed? How do we do mitzvahs for them now that they are no longer able to do mitzvahs themselves? What can we add? And address that question, and to address it sensitively and help the family figure out the best way to do the things forward. I found in my work with veterans, one of the things that we do is there's a lot of people that suffer from survivor's guilt.
Yeah.
I made it home, my buddies didn't.
Yeah.
And that's very painful. They
Yeah.
can wallow in that, or we can say, what do you want to do in their honor? What do you want to do in their memory? How do you want to perpetuate their life by acts of goodness and kindness? Knowing them, how do you want to direct that? For some people, that may be, donations to veterans' causes, like Institute of Jewish Chaplaincy, right? Others may know. I know someone who this person that passed, the person was having survivor's guilt. The buddy was a minesweeper with a dog, right? And they decided to get involved with providing pets for veterans, providing therapy dogs, therapy animals for veterans. And so they're doing that in the memory of their buddy who passed. How do we take the pain and suffering and do something constructive with it? And so if you really care about someone and you're close enough that you're not being a pain in the neck about it, right? You help direct that pain and suffering to help them now. Hey, how do you want to direct this? How do you want to use this for something positive? And that's tremendously therapeutic. Depression is all about self. Bitterness is all about how can I make the world a better place?
When do you bring that up? Is it too soon to bring it up the first day of Shiva, or should you wait several days before you approach that?
Every situation is individual, and it really has to be, you have to have enough empathy to read it. You know, it's a very, something that has to be done very carefully and gently. And it has to come from a place of absolute love. And if you know, we talk in Judaism, we talk about if it comes from the heart, it's received by the heart. You know, if I need to reprimand somebody, they can only hear it if they know I care. It's one of the mottos that I teach my cadets all the time. No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. You can't teach somebody anything until they know that you actually care about them as an individual. Now they can learn from you. And so how much more so in a case of a loss or a pain or a suffering? We have to know person cares, truly cares, and cares about that individual, not just the cause. And then that they can have that conversation about where can I direct this in this energy in a positive way. Wrapping up, thoughts, insights. What do you take away?
Been reading another book that addresses some of this. It's by,
I can't see the title. What is it?
The Anatomy of Hope. It's by Jerome Groopman.
Yep.
And he talks about pain, and he talks about a lot of things, but one of the things that I found most interesting in that book was about the physiology of the brain and addressing pain and how it actually can change the neurological response to pain.
Isn't that phenomenal? Is that fascinating?
Yes, it is.
The
And
human brain
I read it
is,
a long time ago, but I picked it up again.
yeah. The
Um,
human brain is absolutely, I mean, I can't imagine anybody who studies neurology and the human brain that can't clearly see there's a God in the world, because there's just no, I mean,
I agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
amazing. And we're just beginning.
Mm.
We're just beginning to tap
And
what
we'll never
that's
get
capable
there.
of.
We'll never get there.
We'll never get there.
Yeah. It's a beautiful, beautiful, amazing thing. Yeah.
Yep.
How would you use the information from this class in your life today?
I don't know that I'd use the terminology that you did. I don't find anything that you discussed particularly new. I'm not trying to denigrate here.
Oh, it's eternal.
I'm sorry?
It is eternal. It's been a problem for mankind since
Well,
forever.
it is.
Yeah.
I think as we're growing up without a theological reference, but pretty much as with a survival reference, we respond to different stimuli in a way that best ensures our own survival. So we all know people who face problems, difficulties, losses, and who, as the rabbi pointed out, wallow in it. And we all know others who face similar problems, and they more readily move on. They can I like to think of it as compartmentalizing. Not to discuss suppression and repression and all the psychological mumbo jumbo. I had enough of that in college. But we compartmentalize. We talk about dealing with issues and dealing with problems. And that's all well and good and important, and that's a psychological necessity to deal with a problem. But then on the other hand, there is handling a problem. And handling a problem is when you put the pain that you feel aside because it gets in the way of solving whatever the problem is.
Right.
You can come back to the pain later. But in the meantime, there are things to be done. Using death as an example, somebody dies. I remember when my brother died. He was young. It devastated my parents. I ended up doing everything that was necessary for the funeral. My parents were simply not in a condition to do it. Somebody had to.
Yeah.
So I did. It was probably 25 years later before I could remember the things that happened during that period of time.
Yeah.
I couldn't think about them. I couldn't be conscious of all those things for all that period of time, because if I had, it would have gotten in the way of doing things that needed to be done.
Too overwhelming.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
to me, that's because that's how I viewed it. That to me is easier to understand.
I wonder if someone in that somewhere in that period of time, someone else was inspirational to you. Did we lose him?
He's gone.
Mhm.
Didn't want to hear what I had to say, I guess, huh?
Hey, Bob, come back.